What's going on, guys? This is Dan Watson from learningcameras.com, and here I've got the Sony A7S and the Canon 5D Mark III. Now, both the A7S and the 5D are a combination of photography and video cameras, but Sony definitely launched the A7S to appeal to more of a video crowd, while the 5D III is still largely a photographer's camera. And so in one sense, it's a little bit unfair to go ahead with this comparison because the 5D Mark III is still a phenomenal still camera and is definitely the camera I'll be taking with me for my wedding photography jobs. That said, there are quite a few videographers using the 5D III for video, including myself, and so this video is for them. Now, unfortunately, while Canon did include some new video features in the 5D Mark III, like uncompressed HDMI out and better audio control, they still point videographers to its pro line of cameras like the C300, which costs as much as $12,000 if you need any features above that. Now, while many of us are still begging for features like better focus peaking, zebras, better customization, Canon has really given no indication of budging on its stance, and that's where the new Sony A7S comes in. Because while the Sony A7 was a 24 megapixel camera that mostly appealed to photographers, the A7S gets a brand new 12 megapixel chip which allows for better pixel level recording. If you go with a slight crop factor, it's 1.1x, and you can get that crystal clear video recording. The Sony A7S is also loaded with just about every video feature under the sun, and almost every button on this thing is customizable. You can take any control and really make it the way that you would like it, whatever controls you would like. Now, if you're looking for more information on the Sony A7S, check out our full review where we go a little more in depth into the camera. But for now, let's take a look at basically the differences between this A7S and the Canon 5D Mark III. Zebras and focus peaking are great, but what really matters is straight up video quality. And unfortunately, that's where the 5D Mark III takes a serious turn for the worst. Side-by-side footage makes the 5D look like you applied a blurring filter to it or had focus issues, and the differences are really drastic. In fact, after this test alone, I really don't think I'll be able to go back to the 5D Mark III for video recording. At this point, if you're a videographer, you might as well put this camera up for sale and give it back to the photographers where it belongs. And this is coming from a guy who's been a Canon shooter for a long time, and the Canon 5D Mark III and even the Canon 70D I'm using to film this with have been my cameras of choice. But that game is over now, and we're going to get to a different level of video camera. If you take these two cameras into low light, and the A7S once again remains in the lead. Ramping up the ISO yields great results on both cameras, but it's still pretty clear to see the advantage for the A7S. And the sharper image on the A7S also allows me to do a little bit more noise reduction in post while still hanging on to a lot of that detail. And the 5D III just has me craving for more detail even without noise reduction on it. The Sony is able also to record at speeds up to 60 frames a second at 1080p or 120 frames per second at 720p, and even output 4K using an external recorder. Now, the recorder does have some issues, like it's not available yet, and it does mean hooking up something else than that. But the 5D III can also output to an external recorder, but it limits at 30 frames per second at 1080p. Now, focusing has always been a little bit tough with the 5D Mark III, especially if you're trying to focus while recording. Basically, you're left to focus and then start recording, and then you have to manually focus from there. That's really the workflow that has worked best for me. And there's nothing in terms of focus peaking or any focus assist that make that a little bit easier. While the A7S does lag just a bit when tracking, the inclusion of focus peaking as well as regular single point AF while recording places it as a huge advantage to me from the 5D Mark III. I'm able to shoot with a wider aperture in the Sony just because I have confidence that my shots were in focus. However, there's a huge lack of wide aperture lenses for the Sony A7S FE mount. f4 is the widest zoom offered at the moment, and the lack of wide-angle lenses as well as wide aperture lenses really left me looking for something else. Now, if you're coming from a Canon shooter, the 5D III opens up a ton of options for lenses, as well as some great gear from Sigma and Tamron, which I use a lot. Now, Canon also has their cinema line of lenses if you're really concerned about getting great glass in front of that sensor. Now, Sony does offer an adapter that you can put on this camera, and it will give you some differences in AF controls as well as the normal type of AF system that you would see on these. But, you know, it's going to take away from a little bit of the camera. You're going to need to spend another $300 to do that, and you just have to deal with the additional bulk in using an adapter. But that will get you Sony's normal line of full-frame lenses, which at least are great glass. Now, both of these cameras are still cameras, and this is where the 5D Mark III is really going to take its place as the camera of choice. It is just a phenomenal photography, especially for professional markets. While the Sony A7S does take excellent images, it just comes off as a little more of a consumer camera, which is not a bad thing. In fact, some of the pictures are even better than I'm getting from a Sony A7S. But, you know, and it does actually win the low light battle when it comes to photos as well, and great dynamic range on those Sony sensors. But with the 5D3, I've got 61 points autofocus, dual card slots, well-built body. It is just a quick change controls. Every control is right here exactly where I want it. It's just a camera made for professional photographers, and that is not going to change anytime soon. Now, overall, the A7S really feels like it was made for video. When it comes to the options that are available, it really makes the 5D3 feel like it's the wrong camera for the job. And in a way, this is fine, as a 5D is really more of a still camera than a video camera. However, Canon has sold a bunch of these cameras to videographers, and they seem fine promoting it for this task. And this is definitely something that they focused a little bit more on the 5D3 versus the 5D Mark II. While the Sony A7S was not without its limitations, which I go over in my full review of the Sony A7S, using these cameras side by side really made the 5D3 just feel like it was the wrong camera. I mean, to me, it was like taking a Honda Accord off-road. It felt like it wasn't the right tool for the job after using these two cameras side by side. The Canon 5D was never perfect for video, but the A7S makes this so incredibly obvious. And not only that, it costs $1,000 less. So the result was pretty simple for me. If video is primarily what you shoot, the Canon 5D is no longer the tool for it. Now, what you decide to replace it with is a completely different story, as tons of options are now coming up on the market every day. And if you head to learningcameras.com for more information on these cameras, we also have comparisons and reviews on every one of these things that are coming out every day. So feel free to visit there. Let me know your thoughts. Contact me on the contact form on the site, and let me know any questions you have. But for now, for me, if anything, the Sony A7S made it so obviously clear that Canon in this market is just not focused on the video features, and it was plain to see that for videographers, the 5D3 is something of the past, and the new tool for the trade is going to be something like this.